September mornings still carried the tail end of summer. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the subway car, washing every face in bright, golden light. My palm was slick with sweat where I gripped my phone, the interview invitation glowing on the screen. GU Group, Financial Department Assistant. It was the first real interview offer I'd received after sending out 37 resumes. I'm Cheng Jixia, 26 years old, finance degree from a run-of-the-mill second-tier university, 2 years as a cashier at a small company, a company that went under 3 months ago when the boss took off with whatever money he could grab, leaving the last month's payroll unpaid. I'd spent those months holed up in my rented apartment, firing off resumes into the void. I wouldn't call it suffering, exactly, but that feeling of hanging in midair, not knowing where the next meal was coming from, was like a thin needle pressed against the back of my neck. So this interview, I had to nail it. GU Group's headquarters sat in the most expensive office tower in the city center. The glass curtain wall threw back cold blue light in the morning sun. I arrived at the lobby 20 minutes early. The receptionist was a young woman with a ponytail, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up until I asked for directions, then vaguely gestured toward the elevators. Finance is on the 27th floor, go up and turn left. I thanked her and stepped into the elevator. Clutching my resume, it was crowded, so I squeezed into a corner and watched the floor numbers climb. When the doors opened on 27, I stepped out into a quiet corridor. Deep gray carpet swallowed my footsteps. Rows of closed glass doors lined both sides. I turned left, walked a few paces, and spotted an open door with a nameplate on it. I'm nearsighted and hadn't worn my glasses. All I could make out were the characters for finance. I knocked and walked in. That's when I realized I was in the wrong place. This wasn't the finance department, it was a massive office. Floor-to-ceiling windows took up nearly the entire wall, the city skyline stretching out beyond them like a silent painting. A man sat behind the desk, head down, flipping through documents. He looked up when I knocked. I froze. He was young, 30, give or take, a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing clean, sharp lines. His features were striking, high brow, straight nose, lips pressed in a thin line that gave him a cold, unapproachable air when he wasn't smiling. His gaze was flat, like he was reviewing a document that had just landed on his desk. No surprise, no irritation, not even curiosity. I realized I'd barged into somewhere I shouldn't be. I took an instinctive step back, nearly dropping my resume folder. Flustered, I grabbed the doorframe. I'm sorry, I got the wrong. You're here for an interview. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made you straighten your spine without thinking. I opened my mouth to say, no, I'm lost, but his eyes had already dropped to the resume folder in my hand, then lifted back to my face. For what position? I tightened my grip on the folder, my throat suddenly dry. Lying now would be pointless. I took a deep breath and told the truth. I'm here to interview for the finance department assistant. The front desk said 27th floor. I must have taken a wrong turn. He studied me for a few seconds. The look wasn't rude, exactly, but it made me feel like a book whose cover he just flipped open, already reading the first page. Then he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, his mouth twitching slightly, as if weighing the words he was about to say. Finance is on the 29th floor, he said. This is the 32nd. My face burned. I wanted to sink through the floor. A mistake this basic was a death sentence in any interview. I was about to apologize and bolt when he spoke again. What's your name? Cheng Jixia. Cheng Jixia. He repeated it, like he was tasting it. Then he did something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze moving from my face to the computer screen on his desk, then back to me. How about interviewing for the position of CEO's wife? You start tomorrow. I thought I'd misheard. I stood there, my brain hitting pause, everything going white. It took me several seconds to squeeze out a single word. What? He stood up, came around the desk, and walked toward me. He was more than a head taller than me, and I had to tilt my face up to look at him. He held out a business card, dark gray cardstock, embossed gold lettering. GU Huaishan, President, GU Group, I said. His voice dropped a notch, carrying a calm, unhurried certainty. You came to the wrong floor for your interview. That's fine. I happen to have a position open. CEO's wife. The words flew out of me before I could stop them, my voice cracking. Are you joking? I'm not joking. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze serious. Your resume says you studied finance and worked 2 years as a cashier at Hongyuan Company. Correct. I froze. How did he know? Sure, that was on my resume, but it was submitted to the finance department. How could he have seen it? Before I could work it out, he'd already turned back to his desk, pulled a folder from a drawer, and flipped it open. Inside was my resume. When you submit a resume, the system sends a copy to me, he explained it casually, as if reading my confusion. I read yours. I also looked into your previous employer. When Hongyuan went under, you were the last one to leave. You covered 2 months of office rent out of your own pocket and settled all the accounts before you walked away. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He was right. The day Hongyuan collapsed, the boss vanished, the landlord was blocking the door demanding payment, and my co-workers packed up and left one by one. Only I stayed. I used my own savings to cover 2 months of rent and made sure every last employee's final paycheck was accounted for before I left. Nobody's paid me back for that yet. Why? I asked. Because I think you're someone who can be trusted, he said, and I need a partner I can trust. He said it calmly, like he was discussing a business deal. I stood there in front of him, feeling the whole world turned surreal. I looked up at him. His eyes were dark, impossible to read, but every word he'd spoken was as clear as if it had been carved into the air itself. I know this is sudden for you, he said. You can go home and think about it, but if you agree, be at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Bring your ID and your household registration booklet. I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I wanted to say you're insane or what kind of joke is this, but his expression told me he wasn't joking. He stood there like a silent tree, waiting for my answer. Why me? My voice trembled when I asked. You're obviously successful. You could have anyone you wanted. He was quiet for a few seconds, then he said, because I don't have time to date, and I have no interest in dealing with women who are after my money. I need someone I can trust. And you don't seem stupid, and you don't seem like the type to cause me trouble. Blunt, almost hurtful, but every word hit the mark. I stood there, my thoughts a tangled mess, until one thing gradually came into focus. I needed this job. I owed rent. I owed living expenses. If I didn't find work by next month, I wouldn't even be able to afford food, and the position he was offering would at least keep me on my feet. What if I say no? I asked. Then you go to the 29th floor and interview for the finance assistant position, he said, his tone flat. I won't make things difficult for you. The wrong floor. I'll pretend it never happened. By the time he finished speaking, he'd already turned and sat back down behind his desk, picking up his documents again, as if the earth-shattering words he'd just spoken were nothing more than an afterthought. I stood there, his business card gripped in my hand, the cardstock edge pressing into my palm, reminding me this was real. Mr. Gu, I said, and startled myself with the sound of my own voice. You're really not joking. He glanced up at me, the corner of his mouth lifting into a faint, barely there curve. I never joke about serious matters. I stood there a moment longer, then I said, can I go home and think about it? You can, he said. Give me your answer before 8 tomorrow morning. I turned and walked toward the door. Just as I reached it, I heard his voice from behind me. Miss Cheng, the door is on your right, face burning. I turned the corner and nearly walked straight into the glass door. Behind me, I heard a soft laugh, light as a breeze skimming water, gone in an instant by the time I walked out of the GU Group building. The sun had climbed high. I stood at the curb, staring at the business card in my hand, the gold lettering glinting in the light. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend, Lin Xiaoyun. Xiaoyun, I need to tell you something. You're not going to believe it. What? She sounded like she was chewing something. Did you get the job? More unbelievable than getting the job. I took a deep breath. The president of GU Group just asked me to marry him. 3 seconds of silence, then a thunderous coughing fit. Cough, cough, cough. What? I leaned against the railing by the roadside and told her the whole story from start to finish. When I was done, Lin Xiaoyun was quiet for a long moment before she said, are you sure he's not some kind of con artist? There are scammers out there who pretend to be rich businessmen to trick young women. I checked, I said. The business card is real. I looked him up online, the photos match. His Gu Huaishan, president of GU Group, and he knew things about me from Hongyuan. He even knew about the rent I covered. Then what does he want? Her voice carried a note of worry. You're pretty, sure, but you're not exactly a knockout. Why would a big-shot CEO go to all this trouble? He said he needs a partner he can trust. I let out a bitter laugh. I don't know whether to believe him or not, but right now I can't even afford next month's rent. This path is offering, at least it keeps me alive. Lin Xiaoyun was quiet again, then she said, if you really go through with this, I'm coming with you. At least let me see if the guy's trustworthy. I hung up and stood by the road, thinking for a long time. The sun beat down on my back, cars streamed past, everyone rushing somewhere. Only I stood still, Facing a fork in the road I'd never imagined in my life. I knew it was absurd, I knew it was insane, but I also knew that if I let this pass, I'd be right back to the grind of sending resumes. Waiting for calls, getting rejected. I tightened my grip on the business card. Sweat had soaked a small dark patch into the cardstock. I looked down at the line of text, GU Huaishan, President, GU Group. Below it, a phone number. That night, I lay on the narrow bed in my rented room, tossing and turning. My phone screen lit up and dimmed. I typed a few words, deleted them, typed them again. Finally, I sent a text, Mr. GU, I wanted to ask, were you serious about what you said? The reply came in less than a minute. Yes. I stared at that single character for a long time. Then I typed another line. Why me? This time, he took a moment to reply, because the way you looked at me was different from the way they do. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know if he was telling the truth. But it was that one sentence that made me make my decision at 2 a.m. I sat up, opened my phone's notes app, and typed 3 words, I'm in. The reply came quickly, 9 a.m. Tomorrow, Civil Affairs Bureau, I'll be waiting. I put down my phone and stared out the window at the pitch-black night, my heart pounding fast and erratic. I knew I had gambled, and the stake was the rest of my life. But I thought, a man willing to take the time to look into my background, who knew I paid the rent, and who told me your eyes are different, maybe he really isn't that bad. The next morning, I wore a white shirt, tied my hair back in a ponytail, and stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Lin Xiaoyun, worried, followed behind me about 10 meters away, saying she was ready to call the police at any moment. At 9 o'clock sharp, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. GU Huaishan got out, wearing a light grey suit, looking more formal than yesterday. He walked up to me, glanced at the household register and ID card in my hand, and nodded. Let's go. His tone was flat, revealing no emotion. I followed him into the Civil Affairs Bureau, and Lin Xiaoyun made a call me if anything happens gesture at the door, filling out forms, taking photos, stamping documents. The whole process was over before I knew it. Before I could react, a small red booklet was in my hand, with a photo of GU Huaishan and me together. In the photo, his expression was calm, and I was smiling slightly, looking like a couple who met through a blind date and were fairly satisfied with each other. As we walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, he turned to look at me. Where do you live? I told him the address of my rental. He nodded and said, I'll have someone help you move today. You'll stay at the GU residence. That fast? I was stunned. Since we're married, we should live together, he said, otherwise, people will get suspicious. I opened my mouth to argue but couldn't find a reason. He was right. Since we were husband and wife, there was no logic in living apart. I got into the car with him, leaned back in the seat, and watched the streets recede rapidly outside the window, a strange feeling welling up inside me. The car drove into a quiet villa district and stopped in front of a grey-white building. A middle-aged man in his 50s stood at the door, wearing a dark uniform with his hair neatly combed. Seeing me get out, he gave a slight bow. Welcome, I'm Chen, the butler of the GU residence. Uncle Chen. GU Huaishan called to him. Prepare a room for the missus. Yes, sir, Uncle Chen acknowledged, then looked at me again with a warm, slightly appraising gaze. I followed GU Huaishan into the villa. The interior was minimalist modern style, with a living room so large you could run in it. I stood at the entrance, feeling at a loss. This was my first time stepping into such a house. Every piece of furniture looked so expensive I was afraid to touch it. Don't be so tense, GU Huaishan said, as if sensing my discomfort. Just treat this place like your own home. I nodded, but I knew this place was a world away from my own home. I looked down at the brand new marriage certificate in my hand. The two people in the photo were close together, yet exuded a distant politeness. Mr. GU, I began. Call me Huaishan, he interrupted. Since we're married, don't call me Mr. GU Huaishan. I tried saying it, feeling a bit awkward. He acknowledged with a sound, turned, and headed upstairs. After 2 steps, he stopped and looked back at me. By the way, report to the finance department tomorrow. I've already arranged your position. Finance department. I was taken aback. I thought. You thought you wouldn't work after getting married? He glanced at me. I married you to find a partner, not to keep a caged bird. You have ability, so earn your own position. After saying that, he went upstairs without looking back. I stood there, clutching the marriage certificate, a strange and indescribable feeling surging in my chest. This man, nominally my husband, said and did things that made me feel he saw me as an independent person more than anyone else did. Uncle Chen came out of the kitchen, handed me a glass of warm water. Have some water first, I'll show you to your room. I took the glass and thanked him. Uncle Chen smiled, leading me upstairs while saying, Mr. Jiu doesn't talk much, but he has a good heart. If anything feels off for you, just tell me. I nodded. But my mind was on something else. Jiu Huaishan said to report to the finance department tomorrow. The finance department, wasn't that where I originally had an interview? I took the wrong floor, went around in circles, and ended up back at the starting point. Only this time, my identity had changed. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor, looking at the tall ginkgo tree in the courtyard, its leaves already starting to turn yellow. Several cars were parked in the garage below, each worth more than my annual salary. I looked down at my faded white canvas shoes and suddenly felt like this was all a dream, but the marriage certificate in my hand was real, the red stamp was real, and the man named Jiu Huaishan was real too. I took a deep breath, put the certificate in my bag, and pulled out my phone to send Lin Xiaoyun a message. I got married. She replied instantly. What? Say that again. I said, I got married. Jiu Huaishan, president of the Jiu Group, is now my husband. The phone rang immediately, and Lin Xiaoyun's voice was almost shouting, Cheng Zhixia, you've lost your mind. You really got the certificate with him. You've only known him for a day. I know, I said, my voice a bit hoarse, but I don't want to go back to that kind of life. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she sighed. Fine, sis, if you're wronged, remember to tell me. I murmured and hung up. The leaves of the ginkgo tree outside rustled in the wind. I stood by the window, watching the sun sink slowly on the horizon, and a vague sense of anticipation welled up inside me. Tomorrow, I would report to the finance department of the GU Group. I didn't know what awaited me, challenges, hostility, or something else, but I knew I had no way back. I gripped the windowsill tightly and said to myself, Cheng Zhixia, starting tomorrow, you have to stand on your own 2 feet in this unfamiliar city. The next morning at 7, before the alarm went off, I was already awake. The bed at the GU residence was as soft as a cloud, and I hadn't slept well all night. Turning over carefully, afraid of wrinkling the sheets, outside the window, the sky was just beginning to lighten, and the outline of the ginkgo tree grew clearer in the dawn. I stared at the ceiling for a long while before remembering my current identity's Mrs. GU. I got up to wash up, and the wardrobe was already full of new clothes, all delivered by Uncle Chen yesterday afternoon. From workwear to loungewear, with price tags still attached, I picked out a dark grey suit skirt, put it on, and studied myself in the mirror. The person in the mirror looked more energetic, but there was still a hint of unease in her eyes. I smoothed my collar, took a deep breath, grabbed my bag, and went downstairs. Uncle Chen was already waiting in the dining room. Seeing me come down, he smiled and greeted me. You're up early. Breakfast is ready, Mr. GU instructed that you eat before going to the company. The driver is waiting at the door. Where is he? I asked instinctively. Mr. GU left early this morning, saying there was an early meeting, Uncle Chen said, placing a steaming bowl of pumpkin porridge in front of me. Eat it while it's hot. I sat down, took a sip of the porridge. The sweetness was just right. The rice grains cooked soft and sticky. I thought about Jiu Huaishan. He left without telling me. Was it because he didn't think it necessary, or he simply forgot? I stirred the porridge in my bowl and then felt I was overthinking. We were only married in name, so he didn't need to report everything to me. After breakfast, I got into the car, which drove out of the villa district and merged into the morning rush hour traffic. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the dense sea of car lights outside, feeling a knot in my chest. The headquarters of the GU Group stood in the most bustling part of the city center, its towering glass curtain wall reflecting the morning sunlight, so bright it was hard to look at directly. Did you hear? Yesterday our CEO GU got his marriage certificate with some woman. Word is she graduated from some ordinary university. No family background to speak of. Seriously, is CEO GU blind? Half the women in this company are Ivy League grads lining up for him. How did some outsider get him? Who knows? I heard she came for an interview, got off on the wrong floor, and stumbled right into his office. Coincidence? TSK. That's way too calculated. Deliberately taking the wrong floor to land herself a rich husband. My hand froze around my chopsticks. The bite of rice in my mouth sat there, impossible to swallow. Their voices weren't quiet. People at the surrounding tables could hear every word. Some laughed along, a few glanced my way. My face burned. I lowered my head, pretending I hadn't heard a thing, shoved the rice into my mouth and chewed without tasting a single grain. They finished their meal and left with their trays. I stayed rooted in my seat, taking forever to finish my food. I knew this kind of gossip wouldn't stop anytime soon. I'd married Jiu Huaishan, so these stares and whispers were part of the package now, but my chest still felt tight and heavy. I hadn't taken the wrong floor on purpose. I'd never once thought about snagging some wealthy husband at 2 in the afternoon. The department meeting kicked off in the conference room. Zhao Mani sat at the head of the table, holding a report, sweeping her gaze across the room. It's the end of the month, and everyone's racing against the clock. Let me make this clear. This quarter's financial statements must be submitted by Friday. No mistakes, especially, she paused, her eyes landing on me, our new hire. Cheng Zhixia, the reports you're responsible for double-check every single figure. Don't cause me any problems. Understood, Manager Zhao. I nodded. The meeting wrapped up in under half an hour. I returned to my desk and dove back into my reports. Around 4 in the afternoon, my internal line rang. Cheng Zhixia, come to my office. I set down my work, walked over, and knocked on her door. She sat behind her desk without looking up, sliding a file toward me. This is last month's accounts receivable breakdown. Cross-check it for me and have it back before you leave. I picked it up and flipped through it. Dense columns of numbers, dozens of pages. I nodded. Got it. I'll get right on it. Back at my desk, I started going through it line by line. The data looked like it had been pulled from the system. But the more I examined it, the more something felt off. Several entries had amounts and dates that didn't match up. One was recorded as a June transaction, but the contract number belonged to July. Another was missing a zero at the end, throwing the entire report's total off by hundreds of thousands. I stared at the screen for a long time, then flipped through the file again from start to finish. These weren't obvious errors, easy to miss unless you checked every single line. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This data came from Zhao Mani. She'd asked me to verify it. Was she deliberately planting mistakes, waiting for me to submit them so she could tear me down? In front of the higher-ups I hesitated, then decided not to go straight to her. Instead, I opened the internal system and rechecked those entries myself. The original records didn't match the file was definitely wrong. I sat there, fingers hovering over the keyboard, thinking. I pulled out my phone and sent Jiu Huaishan a message. There are some issues with the financial department's report data. I checked, and several entries don't match the system records. A few minutes later, he replied, which ones? Send them to me. I sent over the account numbers with the discrepancies and added, I haven't told Manager Zhao yet. I wanted to confirm I wasn't the one misreading things. His reply came fast. You're not wrong. I'll handle this. You don't need to do anything for now. I stared at the words on my screen, a strange feeling washing over me. He didn't ask why I suspected Zhao Mani. He didn't tell me to mind my own business. He just said, you're not wrong. I suddenly realized this man trusted me more than I'd expected. At the end of the day, I packed up and headed out of the office. Xu Lei waved at me, heading out. See you tomorrow. See you. I walked to the elevator and pressed the down button. The doors slid open, and inside stood a man in a dark suit. Tall and composed, Jiu Huaishan. He gave me a slight nod. Off work, I stepped in and stood beside him as the doors closed. Just the two of us in the car, the silence so thick I could hear every breath we took. How was today? His voice was even, unhurried. Fine. Just busy. I paused. That thing you looked into this afternoon, did you check it? I did. He turned his head toward me. Before Zhao Mani gave you that file, someone had already tampered with it. This isn't the first time something like this has happened in the group. From now on, in the finance department, keep your eyes open. I nodded, not pressing further on who was behind it. I knew the layers beneath this went deeper than I could imagine. If Jiu Huaishan said he'd handle it, I'd trust him for now. The elevator reached the first floor, but he didn't step out. Instead, he pressed the button for the underground parking garage. I blinked. Aren't you going home? I'm driving you home, he said, his tone as casual as if he were stating the weather. That's okay. I can take the subway. You're my wife, he cut in. Driving you home is the least I can do. The doors opened, and he walked out first. I hesitated, then followed. His car sat in its spot, and he opened the passenger door for me. I slid in, catching a faint scent of leather. He started the engine, pulled out of the garage, and merged into the evening traffic. He didn't say much on the drive, and I didn't force conversation. Neon lights flickered on one by one outside the window, painting the city in warm hues. I leaned back in my seat and studied his profile, steady hands on the wheel, focused gaze ahead, a clean, sharp jawline. Jiu Huaishan, I said suddenly. Why did you help me? I asked. With the Zhao Mani thing, you could have let me handle it myself. He was quiet for a moment before answering. You're my wife. Who else am I supposed to help? He didn't look at me when he said it, his tone flat and matter-of-fact. But something in my chest gave a soft, unexpected lurch. I turned away, watching the streetlights blur past, and said nothing. The car pulled up in front of the villa. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle, but his hand came over and rested on mine. His palm was warm, callous just slightly, the weight of it gentle. Jixia, he said, my name low on his lips. I'll handle Zhao Mani, but your work in the finance department, keep doing it the way you have been. I know you can do it well. I looked at him. In the dim light of the car, his eyes seemed deep, like a pool with no visible bottom. I nodded. I know. He pulled his hand back and got out of the car. I sat there, watching his silhouette disappear through the villa's front door, the warmth of his palm still lingering on my skin. I looked down at my own hand and felt, suddenly, that this place didn't feel so foreign anymore. Over the next few days, I kept to a steady rhythm, arriving on time, leaving on time, checking every report Zhao Mani handed me down to the last digit. She never gave me another file with obvious errors, but she didn't exactly warm up to me either. Her words always carried a subtle edge. I pretended not to notice, did my job, and made sure every figure was verified to perfection. On Friday afternoon, the day after the quarterly reports went in, I was called into Zhao Mani's office. She sat in her chair, phone in hand, face unreadable. When she spoke, her tone had gone cold. Cheng Jixia, that accounts receivable breakdown from last month, did you finish it? Yes. I submitted it to the system on Friday. Submitted? Sure, she said, setting the phone down and lifting her eyes to me. But this morning, the audit team flagged several entries that don't match the original vouchers. They're asking how our department did the verification. Cheng Jixia, explain this to me. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. Manager Zhao, I cross-checked those entries against the original records in the system, and they matched. The file you gave me had several errors, and I reported them to CEO GU. He said he'd handle it. Her expression flickered for just a second before settling back. When did you report this to him? Thursday afternoon. I sent him a message. She paused, then pulled a stiff, unnatural smile. All right, I understand. Go back to your desk, I'll look into this further. I turned and walked out of her office, knowing full well this wasn't over. If Zhao Mani was bold enough to hand me a doctored file, she had someone backing her. Today's conversation was just her testing how much I knew. Back at my desk, I opened my computer and was about to dive back into work when my phone buzzed. A message from Jiu Huaishan. Come to my office after work. I need to talk to you. I replied with a quick okay and set the phone down. Outside, the sun was sinking, painting half the sky in shades of orange. I watched the sunset and felt a quiet premonition settle over me. Zhao Mani was just the tip of the iceberg. This building held currents I couldn't yet see, shadows moving beneath the surface. I couldn't guess what else was out there, but I was already standing in the middle of it. All I could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. After work, I packed up and took the elevator to the top floor. There was only one office up there, its door slightly ajar. I knocked twice and heard Jiu Huaishan's voice from inside. Come in. I pushed the door open. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a cup of coffee in his hand, back turned to me. The last light of day spilled through the glass, gilding his silhouette in gold. He heard my footsteps, turned, and gave a slight tilt of his chin. Sit. I settled onto the sofa. He set his coffee on the coffee table and sat across from me, meeting my eyes. Zhao Mani talked to you today. You knew. She called me this afternoon, Jiu Huaishan said the audit flagged issues with the report and asked if I knew anything about it. I told her I did. Those entries were verified by my people. I blinked. What did you say exactly? I told her those entries had discrepancies in the system's original records, that it had nothing to do with her, and she shouldn't try to pin it on you. He held my gaze, calm and steady. She didn't push back. I opened my mouth, wanting to say you shouldn't have taken the blame like that, but the words felt pointless. He'd shielded me, not because I was his wife, but because he knew Zhao Mani was the one who'd tampered with those figures. I looked into his eyes and realized, more than ever, that this man was more dependable than I'd ever given him credit for. Jiu Huaishan, I said, my voice softer than I intended. Thank you. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No need to thank me. You're my wife. It's what I should do. He paused, then added, but keep your guard up. The person behind Zhao Mani isn't just targeting you, they're targeting me too. The more you work in finance, the more you'll see. Just keep your eyes open and know what you're looking at. I nodded, and something inside me felt like a lamp had just been switched on. I knew exactly who he meant by the people behind her. Jiu Mingyuan, his uncle, the vice President of GU Group. I'd seen the name in the company's internal system, and I'd caught whispers here and there that he'd been gunning for GU Huaishan's position for a long time. I stood up, walked to the door, and glanced back at him one more time. He was still sitting on the sofa, coffee cup in hand, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window, lost in thought. I said softly, "I'll head back now, take care on the way." I stepped out of his office and quietly pulled the door shut behind me. The hallway was dead silent, nothing but the echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the empty space. I reached the elevator, pressed the button, and as I waited, my phone buzzed again. I looked down, a text from an unknown number. Just one line, "Miss Cheng, some things are better left unknown. I'd advise you to stay away from the financial department's books." I stared at the words on the screen, and a chill crept up my spine. I looked around the corridor, empty, not a soul in sight. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, my fingers stiff as I pressed the button for the first floor. As the doors closed and the numbers ticked down floor by floor, my chest felt heavier with every passing level. Who sent that message? Zhao Mani, or someone behind her? Stay away from the financial department's books, meaning, if I kept digging, I'd be in for something far worse. I gripped my phone tightly. Outside the car window, the city's dazzling nightscape glittered in the distance, countless lights flickering like scattered stars. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes, but my mind was churning with 1,000 thoughts. GU Huaishan said I just needed to keep certain things in mind, but what he'd told me, was it even enough? Just how deep did the water in this building really run that night? I lay in bed, the glow of my phone screen harsh and glaring in the darkness. I must have read that anonymous text at least 10 times, every word stabbing at my nerves like needles. I tried calling the number back, disconnected. I tried adding it on WeChat, user not found. Whoever sent it had used a burner number, then killed it the moment the message went through. Clean, efficient, professional, not the kind of move an amateur makes. GU Huaishan still wasn't home, said he had a last-minute conference call. I rolled over, tucked my phone under the pillow, and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force myself to sleep, but my brain just kept replaying the day's events on a loop. Zhao Mani's probing, needling attitude, the anomalous accounts the auditors had flagged, and what Uncle Chen had said to me that afternoon in the old estate's backyard. Uncle Chen was the GU family's longtime steward, over 30 years in their service. His hair was white, his speech slow and deliberate, but every word he said carried weight. That afternoon, GU Huaishan had been called out unexpectedly, and I was wandering the garden of the old estate by myself. Uncle Chen was trimming a rose bush. When he saw me, he straightened up, wiped his hands, and smiled. "Young madam, these flowers were old master's favorites when he was alive. They bloom their best every autumn." I walked over and crouched down to look at them. The petals were a deep crimson, edges curling slightly, like layers of dark silk. Uncle Chen stood beside me in silence for a moment, then said, "Young madam, if you ever come across something in your work at the company that doesn't quite add up, you can always come ask me." I looked up at him. His eyes were calm, but there was an unreadable depth in them. He said, "The GU family outsiders see the shine, but underneath, the roots are tangled deep. Some accounts don't live on the surface." At the time, I hadn't fully understood. I took it as the kindly warning of an old man. But now, after that text tonight, his words came rushing back. Some accounts don't live on the surface. Had he known all along that something was wrong in the finance department? I rolled over, grabbed my phone, and scrolled to Uncle Chen's contact. I hesitated, then typed out a message. "Uncle Chen, are you still awake? I wanted to ask you something." About 2 minutes later, he replied, "Young madam, still awake? Go ahead." My fingers paused over the keyboard as I weighed my words. "The other day, you said some accounts don't live on the surface. What did you mean by that?" This time, he was silent for a long, long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then the screen lit up again. "Young madam, do you have time tomorrow afternoon? Come to the old estate, there's something I'd like to show you." I clutched the phone in my hand, my heart beating a little faster. Moonlight spilled through the sheer curtains, pooling white and pale across the floor. I typed back a single okay, then set the phone by my pillow and closed my eyes. I don't know when GU Huaishan came home. I only felt the mattress dip slightly beside me, and a warm hand gently cover mine, carrying a faint chill from the night air. I kept my eyes shut, but I felt his hand rest there for a moment before quietly pulling away. The next morning, I went to work as usual. The finance department's work was tedious and relentless. I spent the entire morning hunched over my desk processing reimbursement forms and ledger entries until my eyes were burning. Zhao Mani didn't show up all morning. Apparently she was at some high-level meeting. I felt a wave of relief, but also a nagging unease. Her absence felt less like a reprieve and more like she was cooking up something bigger. At lunch, Lin Xiaoyun called. She was my college roommate, now working at an accounting firm, and always plugged into the grapevine. The moment I picked up, she cut straight to the chase. Jixia, how's work been lately? Anyone giving you trouble? I set my tray down at a corner table by the window and lowered my voice. Why do you ask? I had dinner with an old colleague yesterday, and he brought up your company. There was genuine worry in her voice. He said your group's finance department has been tense lately. Someone's digging into accounts from years back, but they keep hitting dead ends, and upper management is suppressing it, telling everyone to keep quiet. The moment I heard that, something felt off. You're in that department. You need to keep your guard up. My hand tightened around my chopsticks. This audit, does your colleague know who's behind it? He's not entirely sure either, just said someone up top ordered it, and how far along it's gotten is anyone's guess. She paused. Jixia, be honest with me, are you in some kind of trouble over there? I was silent for a few seconds. Xiaoyun, I can't tell you everything right now, but don't worry, I'll be careful. She sighed. Fine, just make sure you look out for yourself. Call me anytime something comes up. I might not be able to do much, but I can still run errands and dig up information. After hanging up, I stared at the food on my tray and suddenly lost my appetite. That old account from years back Lin Xiaoyun mentioned, could it be connected to the anomalies I'd found? If this problem went back that far, then the people tangled up in it were probably far above Zhao Mani's pay grade. At 3 in the afternoon, I took half a day off and cabbed it to the GU family estate. The old house sat on the outskirts of the city, a vintage Western-style mansion with a courtyard, a few osmanthus trees planted in the yard. This time of year, they were heavy with golden blossoms, their fragrance drifting on the breeze. Uncle Chen was waiting for me at the gate. When he saw me get out of the car, he gave a slight bow. Young madam, you've arrived. I followed him through the courtyard and into the study. It was a modest room, a row of rosewood bookshelves against the wall, a desk by the window, and on it, a yellowed ledger lying open. Uncle Chen walked over, gently pushed the book to the edge of the desk, and said, Young madam, take a look at this. I stepped forward and opened the ledger. It was a handwritten old-style account book, the paper brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. The entries dated back 8 years, each transaction recorded with meticulous neatness, signed with a name I didn't recognize. I flipped through several pages, then stopped dead at one entry. It read special project funding, with an amount of 3.2 million yuan, and the payee was a company I'd never heard of. I frowned and flipped back a few more pages. There were several similar disbursements, varying amounts, but all to the same company, all clustered in the same year. Uncle Chen, I looked up. Where did this ledger come from? This is a copy I secretly made while old Master Gu was still alive. His voice was barely above a whisper. Back then, old Master noticed some discrepancies in the accounts and asked me to look into it privately. I investigated for 3 months and found that all that money had flowed into this company. When I went digging further, I learned that the legal representative of that company is a distant cousin of Mr. Gu Mingyuan's. My hands went cold around the ledger. That company's name, I'd seen it in the group system before. I quickly searched my memory, and then it hit me. Among the batch of anomalous accounts I'd processed last week, there was a payment whose counterparty was exactly this company. Uncle Chen, my voice came out dry and strained. Does Jiu Huaishan know about this? Uncle Chen was quiet for a moment. Old Master had gotten this far in his investigation when he fell ill before he could act on it. Later, when young Master took over the company, I meant to hand this ledger to him, but he just stepped into the role, buried under a mountain of responsibilities. So I didn't rush it, and then, it just got set aside. He paused, then added, Young madam, I'm old now, I don't know how much longer I can hold on to these things. You're in finance, you understand. These accounts, I figured it's better to put this in your hands than to let it rot in mine. I looked down at the yellowed pages, a storm of emotions churning inside me. If these records were accurate, this ledger was direct evidence of Gu Mingyuan embezzling company funds, but it was so old the company in question might have been dissolved by now, the transfer records potentially incomplete. A handwritten ledger alone wouldn't be enough to convict anyone. I closed the book and looked at Uncle Chen. Uncle Chen, I'll hold on to this for now, but you know as well as I do this book alone doesn't prove anything. He nodded. I know, young madam, you're a sensible woman, you'll know what to do. I took the ledger back to the city with me. In the taxi, I kept it in my bag, my fingers tracing the cover as I ran through my options again and again. I decided not to tell Gu Huaishan about this, not yet. He was in a position where every move he made was watched. If he knew I was investigating, it might tip off the wrong people. By the time I got back to the apartment, dusk had settled in. I pushed open the door and was met with the aroma of home-cooked food. Gu Huaishan stood in the kitchen in an apron, ladling soup into a bowl. He heard the door and said without turning around, "You're back, wash up and eat." I changed my shoes, walked over, and saw 3 dishes already laid out on the table, still steaming. I was a little surprised. "You cooked, got off work early today." He set the soup bowl down and untied his apron. "Didn't you say you were taking the afternoon off? I thought you'd be back sooner, ended up waiting till now." His tone was flat, but I could hear a faint note of complaint underneath. I sat down, picked up my chopsticks, and took a bite of the braised ribs. Chewing, I said, "It's good." Gu Huaishan sat down across from me and picked up his own chopsticks. "Where did you go?" I didn't answer right away. I lowered my head and took a mouthful of rice. He didn't press, just ate in quiet. We sat there in silence for a while. Then I set down my chopsticks and looked at him. "Gu Huaishan, 8 years ago, did your company have a special project disbursement, 2 million yuan? His hand paused mid-grip on his chopsticks. He looked up at me. "How do you know about that account?" "I saw it in the finance department system," I said, leaving out any mention of Uncle Chen. The pair on that entry is the same company that appears as the pairee on several suspicious transactions. It struck me as odd, so I took a closer look. Gu Huaishan set down his chopsticks, his gaze turning serious. "That company is called Hongyuan Building Materials. It was registered under the name of a distant cousin of Gu Mingyuan's. That allocation was labeled as an engineering project expense, but in reality, the funds were diverted. I've known about this for a while, but I've never been able to find solid evidence." "You knew?" I was stunned. He nodded. "When I took over the company, someone mentioned it to me, but that account is years old now, and the financial system has been overhauled several times since. The original documents are incomplete. Without a full chain of evidence, I can't touch him." I looked at him, and a strange, complicated feeling welled up inside me. He knew about this, yet he'd held his position without making a move. That told me Gu Mingyuan's roots in the company ran far deeper than they appeared on the surface. The seat Gu Huaishan occupied might look prestigious, but every step he took was on the edge of a blade. "That account," I said. "What if I could find the original documents?" Gu Huaishan's gaze lingered on my face for a moment. Then he said, "If you want to look into it, I can have attorney Ju work with you, but you have to promise me." "Be careful." I nodded. "I know." That night, Gu Huaishan stayed in his study until very late. I lay in bed, Uncle Chen's ledger tucked inside my bag, my mind turning over those numbers again and again. I knew that piecing together a complete chain of evidence from a pile of old accounts wouldn't be easy, but whatever those numbers were hiding was probably far more dangerous than I could imagine. The next afternoon, I slipped away during my lunch break to the archives. The finance department's archive room was on the 12th floor, a windowless space lined with rows of metal cabinets, each one stacked with vouchers and reports organized by year. I greeted the archivist and said I needed to look up an engineering allocation voucher from 8 years ago. The archivist was a woman in her 40s, surname He. She wore reading glasses and spoke in a slow, unhurried manner. She searched the system for a while, then shook her head. "Vouchers from 8 years ago, some of them weren't migrated when we upgraded the system. You'll have to dig through the paper files." "Where are the paper files?" "In the basement storage, 2 levels down." "Sister," he said, "there are years of old documents stacked down there. You'll have to search through them yourself." "Which entry are you looking for?" "I'll log it for you." I gave her the date and amount of the special engineering allocation. She jotted it down in a register, then handed me a key. "The storage room is locked, and this is the only key. Make sure you return it when you're done. The lighting down there is poor. Bring a flashlight." I took the key, thanked her, and rode the elevator down 1 level, then took the stairs to the second basement. The storage room door was an old iron one that groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, it was dim, lit only by a few buzzing fluorescent tubes that cast a sickly yellow glow. Rows of metal shelves were crammed with cardboard boxes and file folders, all coated in a thick layer of dust. I switched on my phone's flashlight and worked my way along the shelves, following the labels. The vouchers from 8 years ago should be on the row near the back. I passed 2 shelving units, then stopped mid-step. I heard a faint footstep behind me. I spun around. The storage room door stood ajar, and the corridor beyond was empty. Not a soul. I held my breath and waited. But there was no further sound. I turned and continued deeper into the room. When I reached the shelf from 8 years ago, I crouched down and flipped through several boxes of vouchers. Finally, at the bottom of a box labeled Special Engineering Projects, I found a stack of yellowed transfer receipts. I turned to the third one and froze. The 2 million yuan transfer, the amount, the peri, the date, all of it matched the ledger exactly. I pulled the voucher from the box, flipped through a few more pages to make sure I wasn't missing anything, then carefully tucked it into my bag. Just as I was about to stand, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A message from Zhao Mani. Cheng Zhixia. I heard you went to the archives this afternoon. What are you looking for? My heart dropped. She knew already. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the screen. After a few seconds, I typed back, nothing much. Looking for an old report. I locked my phone, stood up, and brushed the dust off my knees. The storage room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, heavy and fast. I clutched the voucher in my bag and hurried toward the door. The moment I pushed open the iron door, I nearly collided with someone. Zhao Mani stood there, coffee in hand, wearing that half-smile of hers. Oh, what a coincidence. I just came down to grab something and saw you in there. Did you find what you were looking for? I looked at her, my mind racing. Her expression seemed casual, but her eyes kept flicking to the bag in my hand. I said calmly, found it, an old report like I mentioned. Good. She stepped aside to let me pass, her smile intact. The signal down here is terrible. Next time you need to find something, feel free to call me, I'll come along. I walked past her, and as we brushed shoulders, I caught the faintest trace of her perfume. I didn't look back, heading straight for the stairwell, behind me. Her unhurried voice drifted. Cheng Zhixia, if you can't make sense of that report, come find me, I'll take a look for you. I didn't respond, my steps steady. At the corner of the stairwell, I paused and glanced back. Zhao Mani was still standing at the storage room door, coffee in hand, watching me from a distance. The corridor light fell behind her, leaving her face half in shadow, half in light, unreadable. I turned and climbed the stairs quickly. One thought dominated my mind, that voucher. Had to get to Attorney Zhu as soon as possible. As for how much Zhao Mani knew, how much she'd already figured out, I couldn't guess. But one thing I knew for certain, from this moment on, this quiet war had truly begun. Back at the finance department, I sat down at my desk and tried to look completely normal. I switched on my computer, and a new email popped up on the screen. I opened it, an internal notice announcing a board meeting next Wednesday, with the agenda focused on annual budget review. I stared at those words, and a thought took shape in my mind. If I could build on this voucher and find more evidence, then present it at the board meeting, even Jiyu Mingyuan wouldn't be able to keep the lid on this. But that was an incredibly risky plan. A newly hired employee standing up at a board meeting to publicly accuse the group's vice president of embezzlement without absolute certainty. I wouldn't just fail to bring him down, I'd destroy myself in the process. I closed the email, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a moment's hesitation, I sent Jiyu Huaishan a message. Something came up tonight. I'll talk to you when I get home. He replied almost instantly. Okay. I set my phone down and turned to look out the window. The autumn sky was high and clear, sunlight blazing off the glass curtain wall of the building across the street. I knew that every step from here on had to be more careful than the last. Zhao Mani had already set her sights on me, and Jiyu Mingyuan would likely know soon enough. Those numbers buried in the old accounts were like a deep, dark body of water, and I was wading in, step by step, with no way back. That evening, I spread the vouchers I'd found across my desk and photographed each one with my phone, saving them to an encrypted album. The originals I tucked inside a thick book and placed it in the most inconspicuous corner of the bookshelf. When Jiyu Huaishan pushed the door open, I was crouched in front of the shelf, sliding the book back into place. He leaned against the doorframe, holding a glass of warm milk. He looked at me. Found it, I stood up, brushed the dust off my hands, and walked over to take the milk. Found some things, but I still need to verify them. He didn't press further, he just reached out and ruffled my hair. Attorney Zhu is free tomorrow morning. I'll have him come by. I nodded and took a sip of the milk. The temperature was perfect, neither too hot nor too cold. He stood beside me, not in a hurry to leave, his fingers resting lightly on my shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. Don't stay up too late. Okay, I said. He turned and left, pulling the door shut behind him. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway before crouching down again, pulling out my phone, and looking at the photos of the transfer vouchers. The peri was a company called Hongyuan Building Materials, registered in a neighboring city. I searched the company's business registration, the legal representative was a man named Feng Guoqing, and the registration date fell right around the time of that transfer 8 years ago. I also checked whether this company had any business dealings with GU Group. The result: none, not a single transaction. A company with zero business ties to GU Group had received a 3.2 million yuan transfer 8 years ago, booked under special engineering projects. The number lodged in my mind like a thin needle, impossible to pull out. The next morning, attorney Ju arrived with a black briefcase. He sat in the living room, turning the original vouchers over in his hands, examining them from every angle. He didn't speak right away, just pondered for a moment before looking up at me. "Miss Cheng, do you understand what this means? If this transfer has no corresponding engineering contract or acceptance report, then it isn't a legitimate expense." I nodded. "I know. That's why I need you to help me confirm something. Does Hongyuan Building Materials have any connection to GU Mingyuan?" Attorney Ju closed the voucher folder and adjusted his glasses. "I'll look into it. Give me 2 days. 2 days. I did the math. The board meeting was next Wednesday, 5 days away. That was enough time. But only if Zhao Mani didn't make another move in the interim. As it turned out, I underestimated her. The next afternoon, I was at my desk organizing reports when Zhao Mani walked over, holding a stack of documents. She set them down gently on the corner of my desk. "Cheng Zhixia, these are the Q3 fixed asset inventory sheets. I need you to verify them before end of day. The auditors need them first thing tomorrow morning." I looked up at her. She wore that flawless professional smile, but her eyes were a little too bright. I picked up the stack and flipped through it. The tables were dense asset codes, depreciation data from over a dozen departments. A normal verification would take a full day. "Before end of day," I repeated. Zhao Mani nodded. "Yes. The auditors are pushing, and there's nothing I can do about it." She didn't linger. Turning and heading back to her office, I stared at the stack of files, silent for a moment. Then I opened my computer and started verifying. I knew this was deliberate. She was giving me an impossible task to force me to work late into the night, or make mistakes, or beg for help. She probably assumed the only person I could turn to was Gu Huaishan. I didn't. I started at 2 in the afternoon and worked straight through to 7 in the evening, taking only a single break to refill my water. Line by line, I checked the data, fixed asset codes, depreciation periods, accumulated depreciation. I ran every calculation with my calculator, and whenever something didn't match, I pulled up the previous quarter's records to cross-reference. At 7:30, I closed the last sheet, rubbed my tired eyes, saved the verified file, and sent Zhao Mani an email. "Verification complete. Please review." "Not a single extra word," she replied quickly. "Thanks for your hard work." I shut down my computer and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the darkening sky beyond the window. I knew this was only the beginning. Zhao Mani wouldn't stop at one move, but at least this round, I'd won. The Wednesday board meeting was at 9 in the morning. In the conference room on the top floor of the group headquarters, as the finance department's representative, I'd been asked to sit in and present the Q3 financial data. There were a dozen or so people around the long table. At the head sat Old Master Gu, with Gu Huaishan beside him. Gu Mingyuan sat across from them, twirling a pen in his hand, his face giving nothing away. I sat at the far end, a stack of printed reports in front of me. The presentation was halfway through when Gu Mingyuan spoke up out of nowhere, cutting off the finance manager who was mid-explanation. "Hold on, I have a question." He turned his gaze to me, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Cheng, I hear you haven't been with us long. I also hear you spent some time in the finance department going over old accounts." The room went quiet. Every pair of eyes landed on me. I set down my reports and met his gaze evenly. "Yes, Vice President Gu. I reviewed some historical vouchers in the archives, mainly to familiarize myself with the company's financial processes." Gu Mingyuan nodded, his tone casual. "Good, it's always nice to see young people eager to learn." But he paused. "Some of those old records, well, they're old. The data might not always be accurate. If you come across anything that doesn't quite add up, feel free to bring it up. We can discuss it together. No need to dig around on your own. That's how mistakes happen." He said it lightly, like a well-meaning piece of advice, but I knew it for what it was. A warning. I smiled. "Don't worry, Vice President Gu. I'll be careful." He said nothing more. Turning back to his reports, the board meeting dragged on until noon. As I was packing up my files to leave, Gu Huaishan walked over from the head of the table and stopped beside me, his voice low. "Lunch together." I nodded. He reached out and took the file folder from my hands, the gesture so natural it might as well have been routine. I felt a few pairs of eyes sweep across my back. But I didn't turn around, I just followed him out of the conference room that afternoon. Attorney Ju sent me a message. Found it. The legal representative of Hongyuan Building Materials, Feng Guoqing, is a distant cousin on Jiyu Mingyuan's mother's side. The company account was opened 8 years ago and closed 3 years later. During that period, there were only those 3 transfers, totaling over 7 million. I stared at the message, my fingers tightening around my phone. 3 transfers. The one I'd found was just one of them. That meant the ledger held 2 more similar expenditures, and the combined amount likely exceeded 7 million. Another message came through from Attorney Ju. The transfers were concentrated between 8 and 6 years ago, exactly the window when GU Group's large commercial project was in its planning to completion phase. But none of the project settlement reports mention Hongyuan Building Materials even once. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Over 8 years, GU Mingyuan had siphoned more than 7 million out of the group's accounts through a shell company. Whether there were actual construction contracts or inspections, I didn't know, but what I did know was that if this could be proven, it would be enough to destroy GU Mingyuan's reputation completely. The problem was, the evidence wasn't complete yet. I only had the transfer vouchers, no contracts, no invoices, no inspection reports. If GU Mingyuan dug in his heels and claimed it was a normal business transaction, the whole thing would just look like a financial oversight, not embezzlement. I needed more that night. I went through the vouchers again in the study. When I reached the last page, my eyes caught a small line of print in the corner, an archive number, ZC 2016-73, an archive number. I froze for a second, then opened my laptop and logged into the group's internal electronic archive system. I typed in the number, a record popped up, document name, Special Project Settlement Report, Hongyuan Building Materials, archive location, archive room, section A, year, 2016, a settlement report. I stared at those words, my heart suddenly hammering. If this report existed, it would either prove the money was a legitimate expense or prove that GU Mingyuan had falsified the settlement documents. The next morning, I went to the archive room to check out that settlement report. The same bespectacled archivist was there. When I gave him the number, he flipped through the registration log for a moment, then looked up. This file's been checked out. My chest tightened. By who? He pushed up his glasses. Manager Zhao. She borrowed it last Thursday, hasn't returned it yet. Zhao Mani. She'd gotten to it before me. I walked back to the finance department, sat down at my desk, and stared at my computer screen, my mind racing. There were only 2 possibilities for why Zhao Mani had taken the settlement report. 1. She had no idea how important it was and had just pulled it at random. 2. She knew exactly what it was, and she'd already handed it over to GU Mingyuan. If it was the second one, then GU Mingyuan already knew I was digging into that money. I pulled out my phone and texted Attorney Ju. Zhao Mani took the settlement report. The original might not be safe. He replied a few minutes later. What about a copy? There isn't one. I didn't get the chance to make one. I paused, then added, but I have the archive number. There should be a scanned version in the electronic system. Attorney Ju responded quickly. I'll see if I can pull it. If there's a backup in the system, the original being gone doesn't matter. That afternoon, I couldn't shake the unease. Zhao Mani hadn't shown up in the finance department all morning. Her office door was shut, the lights off. I asked a colleague nearby, who said she'd taken a half-day off in the morning and would be back in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. She walked in, carrying a paper bag, a smile on her face. She looked like she was in a good mood. As she passed my desk, she paused and glanced down at me. Cheng Zhixia, I heard. You went to the archive room this morning. I looked up and met her eyes. Looking for an old file. She smiled. Did you find it? I held her gaze, keeping my voice flat. No, someone had already borrowed it. Her smile didn't waver. That's a shame. Want me to ask around and see who took it? I shook my head. No, that's fine. Thank you. She didn't push it. She just carried her paper bag back to her office and closed the door. I watched that door shut, and the tension in my chest wound tighter. She'd taken the settlement report. And then she'd casually asked me what I was looking for. She was testing me, trying to figure out how much I knew. I couldn't let her see through me that evening. I got home before Jiyu Huaishan did. I sat in the living room, my phone on the coffee table, the screen staying lit as I waited for Attorney Ju's message. A little after 9, it came through. Found the scanned copy in the electronic system. But it's only the first page and the last page. The middle pages are missing. I stared at that message, my heart sinking. Only 2 pages. If those pages didn't contain the key information, Then even having the settlement report wouldn't prove anything. I asked him, "What's on the first and last pages?" A few minutes later, he sent 2 images. I opened them. The first page was the cover of the settlement report, project name, amount, date, with Hongyuan Building Materials Company seal and the legal representative's signature below. The last page was the inspection and acceptance section. It read inspection passed, and the signature line bore the name Gu Mingyuan. I stared at that signature for a long time. Gu Mingyuan, he was the signatory for the project's acceptance, which meant if there was anything wrong with this money, he, as the person who approved the inspection, couldn't possibly claim ignorance. At the very least, this scanned page proved he was involved in the approval and acceptance of this expenditure, but it wasn't enough. I needed the middle pages, the ones with the detailed project breakdown and payment schedule. If those pages contained falsified or inflated content, that would be solid evidence. I set my phone down and leaned back into the sofa, closing my eyes. Zhao Mani had the original, the electronic system only had a partial scan. Where were the middle pages? Had they never been scanned when the file was archived, or had someone deliberately deleted them? The next day, during my lunch break, I went back to the archive room. The same archivist was there. I asked him, "That settlement report manager Zhao borrowed, did she mention what she needed it for?" He thought for a moment. "She said she needed to verify some fixed asset entry records. She borrowed it for a week." "Oh, and she also made a copy." "A copy?" My pulse jumped. "Is the copy still here?" He shook his head. "She took the original. The copy stayed in the archive room. She put it back in its original spot on the shelf." My heart skipped a beat. "Can I take a look?" He didn't think twice. He led me into the archive room, walked over to the shelf, and pulled out a brown craft paper file. "Here it is." I took the file and slid out the document inside, a complete photocopy of the settlement report. I flipped quickly to the middle pages, and my finger stopped on one particular page. It was a progress payment request form. It listed the project's construction progress. Reading, main structural construction completed, requesting payment of project progress fees. The amount matched the transfer voucher exactly. Below it were the construction company's seal and signature, and Gu Mingyuan's approval signature. I turned to the next page. It was a materials list, quantities and unit prices for rebar, cement, brick, and stone, with a total at the bottom. I scanned the numbers, and then I stopped cold. The unit prices on that list were nearly double the market rate. Rebar was listed at 8,200 yuan per ton. The market price that year had been under 5,000. Cement was listed at 1,100 yuan per ton. The market price had been under 600. I stared at those numbers, my fingers trembling slightly. The material prices in this settlement report had been artificially inflated by more than double. The excess, that was the money that had been siphoned out. I carefully tucked those photocopied pages into my bag, put the craft file back in its place, and walked out of the archive room. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the wall in the hallway and took a few deep breaths to steady myself. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Attorney Zhu. "Found it. The payment request form and materials list from the middle of the settlement report. I have them." He replied quickly. "Is Gu Mingyuan's signature on them?" I glanced down at the pages in my bag. Yes. His approval signature is on the payment request form. Attorney Zhu didn't reply right away. After a long pause, his message came through. "Take photos of the copies and send them to me. Keep the originals with you. Don't hand them to anyone for now. We'll bring this up at the board meeting." I put my phone away, gripped my bag strap, and walked quickly back to the finance department. As I reached the entrance, I paused and glanced through the glass door. Zhao Mani was standing at her office door, holding a cup of coffee, looking right at me. From this distance, I couldn't read her expression, but I knew she was watching me. I pushed the door open, walked in without meeting her eyes, and sat down at my desk. I turned on my computer and started on my work. She didn't come over, she didn't say anything, but that feeling of being watched lingered, like a thin splinter lodged in my back that I couldn't shake no matter how I moved. The next few days, I kept up appearances. I came to work, did my job, went home, just like always. Zhao Mani didn't cause me any trouble, and she didn't test me again. Gu Mingyuan showed up at headquarters twice, and both times he passed by the finance department without so much as glancing my way. That kind of excessive calm only made me more uneasy. Before a storm, the sea is always eerily still. Wednesday, board meeting, 10 in the morning, Old Master Gu presided over it himself. The agenda was annual budget review and major project approvals. Gu Mingyuan sat on the left side of the long table, a stack of documents in front of him, still twirling that pen. Gu Huaishan sat to the Old Master's right, his expression composed. I sat at the far end as the finance department's representative, nothing in front of me but a glass of water. The meeting moved to the second item on the agenda, a discussion about an additional budget for a large commercial project. Gu Mingyuan spoke first, proposing an additional 36 million yuan, citing rising material costs and extended construction timelines. He laid it out logically, with detailed data to back it up. The directors around the table nodded along. I looked at him, waited until he finished speaking, then said, "Vice President Gu, I'd like to ask you a question." He turned his head, meeting my gaze with a calm expression. "Please go ahead, Miss Cheng." I opened the folder in front of me and pulled out a printed table. Last year's third quarter, Hongyuan Building Materials handled a special project for our group. The material unit prices listed in the settlement statement were nearly double the market rate for that same period. I'd like to ask, how was that pricing determined? The conference room went quiet for a beat. The smile on Gu Mingyuan's face didn't change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. "Miss Cheng, that project you're referring to is several years old now. Hongyuan Building Materials was selected through a bidding process at the time, and the pricing went through proper approval channels." "I'm aware it went through approval." I nodded and pulled out another page. "This is the payment request form from back then. It carries your approval signature. But from what I've been able to find, Hongyuan Building Materials has had no other dealings with GU Group apart from this one transaction. Their registered address is in a neighboring city, and the legal representative is a distant relative on your mother's side of the family." A low murmur rippled through the room. The smile on Gu Mingyuan's face finally faded. "Miss Cheng, what exactly are you implying by digging into all this?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I turned to Chairman Gu. "Chairman Gu, I've had copies of this settlement statement and payment request form verified by Attorney Ju. The material prices are inflated, the payment schedule doesn't match the actual construction timeline, and after the funds were transferred out of the group's accounts, there's no corresponding project acceptance report on file." When I finished, I handed the copies to Jiu Huaishan, who was sitting beside me. He took them, flipped through a few pages without looking up, then placed the documents in front of Chairman Gu. Chairman Gu put on his reading glasses and went through each page slowly. He took his time. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Gu Mingyuan sat frozen in his seat. The pen in his hand had stopped moving somewhere along the way, and his face was pulled tight. He stared at me, his voice dropping low. "Cheng Zhixia, you're a newly hired employee. You walk into a board meeting with a few photocopies and try to accuse a vice president of this group." I met his gaze and said calmly, "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just putting what I found on the table for everyone to discuss." He let out a laugh, cold and sharp. Fine. Since you claim the material prices are inflated, have you considered that this project was a key initiative for the group back then? Every single price went through the finance department's review. You're going to overturn years of conclusions with a few old documents. Miss Cheng, don't you think you're getting a little ahead of yourself?" He turned to Chairman Gu. "Father, I suggest we form a special investigation committee to look into this properly. We can't let an employee who's been here less than a month question a senior executive based on nothing but photocopies." Chairman Gu didn't respond right away. He set down his glasses and sat in silence for a moment before turning to Jiu Huaishan. "Huaishan, what's your take?" Jiu Huaishan set down the documents in his hand. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed clearly. "I recommend we commission an independent third-party audit firm to conduct a full review of all Hongyuan Building Materials transactions. If nothing comes up, then Miss Cheng was being overly cautious, and I'll apologize on her behalf. But if problems do surface," he looked at Jiu Mingyuan, "then we handle it according to group policy." Jiu Mingyuan's expression finally cracked. He stared at Jiu Huaishan, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. Chairman Jiu nodded. "We'll do as Huaishan suggests, form a special audit team, results within 3 days. He paused, then added, "Mingyuan, for these 3 days, you're to step back from all financial approval work at the group." Jiu Mingyuan was silent for a long moment. Finally, he lowered his head. "Understood." The meeting adjourned. I was gathering my documents when Chairman Jiu called out, "Cheng Zhixia, stay a moment." I stopped and walked back to him. He looked at me with a complicated expression, and after a long pause, asked, "When did you first notice something was off with those accounts?" I said, "My second week on the job. I was cross-checking historical vouchers." He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything more, just waved a hand. "Go on." Then, I walked out of the conference room. The corridor was bright with autumn sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, pooling on the tiles in wide golden patches. Ji Huaishan was waiting by the elevator. When I reached him, he took the folder from my arms. "Were you scared?" I shook my head. "Not really." He glanced down at me, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Back in that room, when you were speaking, your hands were shaking the whole time." I blinked, then looked down at my own hands. They were steady now. But he was right. In that conference room, my fingers had been gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had gone white. I looked up at him. "You already knew." He raised an eyebrow. "Knew what?" "That Hongyuan building materials was dirty." He didn't deny it, he just said, "I'd been investigating for a long time, but I never found the complete evidence chain. The materials you uncovered, they filled in the last missing piece." I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Everything I'd dug up, he'd already been chasing. He hadn't told me. Probably because he didn't want me getting in too deep, didn't want me in danger. I was quiet for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Next time something like this happens, give me a heads up first." He smiled. "All right, next time, I will." 3 days later, the audit results came back. Hongyuan building materials accounts had serious problems: inflated material prices, payment schedules that didn't match actual construction progress, totaling 7,600,000 yuan. Ji Mingyuan was suspended pending investigation. Zhao Mani, as the finance department's handling officer, was also called in for questioning. The afternoon the news broke, the finance department was eerily quiet. No one gossiped, no one even glanced my way, but I knew, from that day on, no one would ever underestimate the president's wife who married her way in again. Friday evening, Ji Huaishan came to pick me up from the finance department. He stood in the doorway, not stepping inside, just giving me a small wave. I packed up and walked out to find him holding a manila envelope. I walked over. "What's that?" He handed it to me. "Open it." I tore it open. Inside was a promotion notice, finance department. Supervisor, Cheng Zhixia. I looked up at him. "Did you arrange this?" He shook his head. "Not me. Chairman Gu approved it personally." I froze, glancing down at the notice again. Chairman Gu, he must have read my expression, because he said, "You uncovered those accounts and saved the group from a major loss. You earned this." I tucked the envelope away without another word. He reached out and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "Come on, let's go home." I held his hand tightly and walked out of the building with him. The autumn evening wind carried a chill, sweeping around the street corner and puffing his jacket out slightly. I turned to look at him. He was looking down at his phone, his other hand still holding mine firmly, not letting go. When the streetlights flickered on, I suddenly remembered the first day I met him. I'd gotten off on the wrong floor, pushed open that door, and he'd looked up and said, "Applying for the position of president's wife, report for duty tomorrow." Back then, I thought it was a joke. I didn't realize until later that he'd been completely serious. From that day to this, just a few short months. But my life felt like someone had pressed fast forward. I'd gone from an ordinary job seeker to the wife of GU Group's president, and now to finance department supervisor. Everything had moved so fast it felt like a dream, but the feel of his hand in mine was real. Warm palm, solid grip. That weekend, Chairman GU hosted a family dinner at the old estate, calling it a celebration. When GU Huaishan and I arrived, Uncle Chen was waiting at the entrance. Seeing me, his face broke into a smile. "Young madam is here." I nodded and walked past him. He lowered his voice. "The old master's in a good mood today. He's been talking about you all evening." I smiled and stepped into the living room. Chairman GU was on the sofa. Seeing me come in, he waved a hand. "Zhixia, come sit." I walked over and took a seat on the sofa beside him. He looked at me, his gaze much softer than before. "That account matter, well done. Huaishan didn't misjudge you." I felt a little embarrassed. "Chairman GU, you're too kind. I was just doing my job." He waved a dismissive hand. "From now on, if there's anything at the group you're unsure about, you can come to me." He paused, then added, "And from now on, call me Grandpa." I blinked, then smiled. "All right, Grandpa." That meal was lively. GU Huaishan sat beside me, occasionally putting food on my plate. Chairman GU talked with him about group matters, and every so often turned to ask me about work. I didn't try to perform or impress. I spoke when I had something to say and listened quietly when I didn't. By the end of the meal, the look in Chairman Gu's eyes when he regarded me had warmed considerably. After dinner, GU Huaishan drove us home. An old song played on the radio, the melody slow and easy, streetlights sliding past the window one by one. I leaned back in the passenger seat, watching his profile, and spoke up. "GU Huaishan." He hummed in acknowledgement, not turning his head. "Why did you choose me?" Back then, he was quiet for a moment, not answering. The car stopped at a red light. He turned to look at me, his gaze serious. "Because when you walked into the wrong floor and pushed open that door, you looked at me without that fawning expression everyone else wears." I blinked. "That's it." He smiled, not entirely. "Later I looked into your background, ordinary family, solid workability, no complicated social entanglements. But most importantly," he paused, "when you didn't know who I was, you treated me as an equal." The light turned green. He turned back to face the road. "I don't need a wife who rides on my coattails. I need someone who can stand beside me." I looked at him, something in my chest giving a quiet thump. I lowered my head, not saying anything, but I couldn't stop the corners of my mouth from curving up. The car pulled into the complex and down into the underground garage. He killed the engine and unbuckled his seatbelt, but didn't rush to get out. He turned to face me. "Cheng Jixia, starting tomorrow, people at the group will call you Mrs. Gu, and some will call you Supervisor Cheng, but you don't need to care what anyone calls you. Just remember one thing." He paused. "You're someone I chose, and you're someone you chose to become." My eyes stung a little, but I didn't cry. I smiled and reached out to take his hand. "Got it." He turned his hand over, lacing our fingers together. "Come on, let's head up." I got out of the car with him, crossed the garage, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I caught our reflection in the polished metal, standing side by side. He was a head taller than me, his profile sharp and clear, a faint hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. I thought to myself that this city's autumn felt warmer than usual this year. Later, Jiu Mingyuan's case reached its conclusion. The audit confirmed he had inflated material prices through Hongyuan building materials, siphoning a total of 7,600,000 yuan from the group's accounts over time. He was stripped of his vice president position and referred to judicial authorities. Zhao Mani, as the handling officer, was terminated and required to cooperate with the investigation. The finance department went through a reshuffle. Jiu Huaishan brought in several senior financial professionals from outside and reorganized the department's processes from the ground up. As the new supervisor, I led the effort to rebuild the internal audit system. Those months were busy. I often worked late into the evening, but every step felt solid beneath my feet. Chairman Gu would occasionally call on Friday nights, asking whether Jiu Huaishan and I were coming back to the estate for dinner over the weekend. Sometimes we went, sometimes we didn't. Every time we went back, Uncle Chen would have my favorite dishes prepared in advance, and Chairman Gu would pull me aside for some small talk, occasionally bringing up company matters and asking for my thoughts. I gradually realized that he wasn't actually as stern as he appeared on the surface. He just had a habit of keeping up the dignified air of an elder. One time, after a few drinks, he grew more talkative and said to me, "Jixia, Huaishan has never been one to talk much since he was a child. He keeps everything bottled up inside. In the future, be patient with him. Will you?" I nodded. "I will." He smiled, satisfied. Day by day, life went on, calm and steady. I grew more and more comfortable in my role in the finance department, and my relationships with my colleagues gradually warmed. No one brought up the fact that I'd gotten in through connections anymore, because everything I did was right there in the open, able to withstand any scrutiny. It wasn't until the year-end gala that Jiu Huaishan took the stage to give his speech. Midway through, he suddenly looked down at the audience, his gaze landing on me. He said, "This year, the group weathered some storms, and we accomplished some things as well. I want to give special thanks to one person, my wife, Cheng Jixia. She proved her value to the group through her own ability, and she proved that my choice back then was the right one." Applause rippled through the room, and many people turned to look at me. I sat there, my face a little warm, but my heart was warm too. After the gala ended, he held my hand as we walked out of the hotel. The night breeze was cool, and the stars overhead were bright. I leaned against his shoulder and suddenly said, "Jiu Huaishan, when you said start tomorrow, I thought you meant I'd be reporting to the finance department." He looked down at me and smiled. "What else would it have meant?" I smiled back. "I thought you were going to make me your secretary." He raised an eyebrow. "That could have worked too, but I wouldn't have been able to part with you." I gave him a light shove, and he laughed, tightening his grip on my hand. "Come on, let's go home." On the drive back, the neon lights outside the window swept past in a blur. I leaned against his shoulder, closed my eyes, and listened to the melody of an old song playing in the car. I knew that starting tomorrow, it would be another ordinary day. I'd go to work, he'd have meetings, and we'd have dinner together in the evening, trading stories about our days. Days like this, ordinary and steady, were things I'd once never dared to wish for. I opened my eyes and turned my head to look at him. He was focused on the road ahead, a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, as if he were thinking about something pleasant. I didn't disturb him, I just closed my eyes again, soaking in the warm air of the car and the warmth radiating from his palm. When the car pulled into the garage, he gently patted my hand. "We're here." I opened my eyes and saw him looking down at me, his gaze tender. I smiled. We're here." We got out and walked into the elevator side by side. As the doors slid shut, I looked at our reflections standing together in the metal doors and suddenly felt that the wrong floor I'd taken that autumn. The door I'd pushed open, it all seemed like fate had arranged it. If I hadn't taken the wrong floor that day, if I hadn't pushed open that door, maybe I'd still be just another job seeker in this city, squeezing onto the subway every morning, sending out resumes, not knowing where tomorrow would lead. But I did take the wrong floor. I did push open that door. I saw him look up and say, "Applying for the position of CEO's wife, start tomorrow." In that moment, my life took a turn, down a path I'd never imagined, and that path led all the way to today. I turned my head and looked at the man who had walked through an entire autumn beside me, and I felt a deep calm settle inside me. He seemed to sense my gaze and looked down. "What's wrong?" I shook my head and smiled. "Nothing. Just thinking, this is nice." He paused for a moment, then smiled. "Too, yeah, it is." The elevator arrived, and the doors opened. He reached out his hand and led me out. The lights in the hallway were on, casting a warm yellow glow across his shoulders and onto my hand. Our fingers intertwined as we walked side by side toward the door, as if we'd walked through an entire autumn together. Heading toward one tomorrow after another, I stopped walking, suddenly wanting to ask him something. He noticed my pause and turned to look at me. "What is it?" I lifted my face and looked at him seriously. "Gu Huaishan, if I hadn't taken the wrong floor that day, would you have found me eventually?" He was silent for a moment, then smiled. The smile was faint, but it seemed to gather all the light of autumn in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I'd already seen your resume. Your name was on the initial screening list for the finance supervisor position. Before you pushed that door open, I was actually looking at your resume at that very moment." I froze. "So, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision at all." He let out a soft laugh. "Cheng Zhixia, I'm not the kind of person who does things without preparation, but the way you pushed open that door that day, that was definitely beyond my expectations." He paused, then looked down at me. "You're much prettier than what your resume says." My face flushed, and I reached out to hit him. He caught my hand and pulled me a little closer. The hallway was utterly quiet, with only the warm yellow light falling on his slightly curved lips. He said, "Cheng Zhixia, you've done really well this year. But I want you to know, even if you hadn't accomplished anything, I still wouldn't regret saying those words to you that day." I looked at him, my eyes stinging a little, but the corners of my mouth curved upward. What if I refused to accept that favor? He raised an eyebrow. "Then I'd just have to court you all over again. Anyway, there's no way you're getting away from me." I laughed out loud, wrapped my arms around his waist, and buried my face in his chest. He was caught off guard for a moment, then laughed too, reaching up to gently stroke the top of my head. "Come on, let's go home," he said. I nodded but didn't let go. He didn't rush me either, he just stood there quietly, letting me hold him for a while. A breeze drifted in from the end of the hallway, carrying the cool air of a late autumn night, but his embrace was warm. What happened afterward is something many people know. On the day the GU Group released its annual financial report, the internal audit system reform plan submitted by the finance department was named the industry's best practice case of the year. As the lead coordinator, my name appeared in reports from several financial media outlets. When Chairman GU saw the coverage, he sent a rare message in the family group chat, "That Cheng Zhixia kid, she's got real ability." Gu Huaishan screenshot the message and sent it to me with a smug emoji. I sent him an eye roll in return, but I couldn't stop the corners of my mouth from curling up, and between Gu Huaishan and me, there was a small tradition. Every autumn, on some weekend, he'd take me back to the group headquarters, ride that elevator from the first floor to the top, and when we passed the floor where I'd gotten lost that day, he'd stop, turn to look at me, and say, "Cheng Zhixia, welcome aboard." Every time, I'd laugh and reply, "Gu Huaishan, why didn't you say applying for the position of CEO's secretary back then?" And every time, he'd answer seriously, "Because a secretary can be replaced anytime. But there's only one wife, and she's you." He never smiled when he said it, but the warmth in his eyes, I saw it clearly every single time. And so we went on, year after year, walking through one autumn after another. To everyone else, I was Mrs. GU, the finance supervisor, that lucky woman who married the CEO after taking the wrong floor, but in my own heart, I was always Cheng Zhixia. The one who, on a late autumn morning, pushed open a door, met someone, and step by step, became the person she wanted to be, and Jiyu Huaishan was always there beside me, fingers intertwined with mine, never letting go.